The orbital station Xenthar Prime hung suspended against the velvet black of space like a jeweled crown, its crystalline spires refracting the light of 3 suns into a haughty display of iridescence. It was a monument to power, a declaration in architecture. We are the architects of order, and you are merely guests in our universe. The docking bays teemed with vessels from 100 worlds, sleek Vexian needle ships, hulking Xenthar dreadnoughts, the fractal-hulled Nixari envoys, each a testament to their species' dominance. And among them, like a sparrow among eagles, drifted the UNSS Humility, humanity's lone diplomatic shuttle. Inside the Grand Concourse, the air thrummed with the low-frequency hum of translator implants and the sharper, more dangerous sound of murmured alliances. High Chancellor Vexus of the Vexian hegemony presided over the chamber from her elevated podium, her 6 segmented limbs arranged in the traditional posture of unassailable authority. Her chitinous carapace gleamed under the artificial light, each ridge polished to intimidate. "Delegates of the Pan-Galactic Summit," she began, her voice a symphony of condescension, "we convene to address the disruptions. Here," she paused, letting the word linger like a bad odor, "introduced by those who lack the discipline to adhere to our established order." A ripple of agreement passed through the assembled dignitaries. The Car Dominion's representatives, their crystalline exoskeletons clicking in unison, leaned forward with predatory interest. The Nixari Collective's envoys, their tripartite faces flickering through expressions too subtle for human eyes to parse, exchanged glances that might have been amusement or contempt. And then there was Dr. Elias Carter. He sat in the back row of the observation gallery, a lone human in a sea of alien grandeur, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp behind wire-frame glasses. The summit's organizers had given him a seat between a methane-breathing Ylithi and a hovering drone from the AI enclaves, a deliberate insult, a reminder of humanity's place in the hierarchy. Afterthought. The so-called human problem, Vexus continued, is one of unpredictability. Their systems are chaotic. Their allegiances shift like solar winds. They lack the refinement, another weighted pause, of species who have mastered the art of governance. A murmur of approval. Carter suppressed a smile. Chaotic, unpredictable. To the Vexians, those were flaws. To humanity, they were tools. He let his gaze drift across the chamber, noting the cracks beneath the facade of unity. The Xenthar envoy, Lord Crix, was tapping his secondary claws against the armrest, a sign of impatience, or perhaps irritation at Vex's grandstanding. The Nixari First Voice, a being of serene composure, had one tendril discreetly coiled around a data slate, likely reviewing some private grievance. Even the machine diplomats, hovering at the periphery, emitted a faint dissonant hum whenever Vexus spoke. They're not a monolith, Carter thought. They're a powder keg. The Chancellor's speech reached its crescendo. Therefore, it is the decision of this summit to impose regulatory measures upon human expansion. Quotas, oversight, containment. The word landed like a guillotine blade. Carter didn't flinch. He'd expected this. What he hadn't expected was the flicker of movement to his left. The Nixari aide beside him, a junior functionary, judging by the duller hue of their facial markings, leaned infinitesimally closer. "You're taking this rather well," they murmured in Galactic Standard, their voice barely audible over the applause. Carter kept his eyes forward. Would shouting help? A pause. Then a soft, trilling sound, the Nixari equivalent of a laugh. No. But it would be entertaining. Carter filed that away. Humor, a crack in the armor. As the assembly dissolved into recess, the major delegations withdrew to their private chambers, already weaving the threads of backroom deals. Carter was, predictably, not invited. He lingered instead near the refreshment nexus, sipping a cup of something the station's synthesizer claimed was near coffee. It tasted like burnt algae. "You are the human," the voice came from behind him, mechanical, genderless. Carter turned to find a floating drone, its spherical core pulsing with faint blue light. "That's me," he said. "Dr. Elias Carter. And you are?" "Designation, Zara, 9. Diplomatic liaison for the Autonomous Machine Enclaves." The drone's voice dropped to a subvocal frequency. "You are being watched." Carter didn't react. "By whom?" "Vex's security detail. They consider you a variable." "Flattering." Zara, 9's core flickered. "You are not what they expected." Carter took another sip of his terrible coffee. "Good." Across the concourse, Chancellor Vexes stood encircled by sycophants, her limbs gesturing in sweeping, imperious arcs. She hadn't so much as glanced at Carter since her speech. Underestimation, he thought, is the most powerful advantage of all. The stage was set, and humanity's greatest weapon, its ability to connect, to adapt, to network, was already at work. The recess bell chimed through the Xenthar Prime's grand chamber, its crystalline tones reverberating off the obsidian walls like a polite dismissal. Delegates rose in unison, their movements precise, their alliances already calcified. High Chancellor Vexis swept from the dais without a backward glance, her retinue of Vexian adjutants closing ranks around her like a living shield. The Xenthar delegation, towering, chitin-plated diplomats with eyes like polished onyx, stalked toward their private onogs, while the Nixari collective's emissaries glided away in eerie synchronicity, their bioluminescent markings pulsing with quiet disdain. Dr. Elias Carter remained seated. He sipped his terrible coffee, watching the choreographed exodus. The summit's first session had been a masterclass in bureaucratic theater, proclamations of unity, veiled threats disguised as mutual cooperation, and Vex's opening remarks, a speech so dripping with condescension it could have powered a small reactor. Humanity, Shed declared, was a disruptive outlier, its political structures quaintly chaotic, its influence best contained. And yet, Carter smiled into his cup. Containment required walls without cracks. A shadow fell across his table. A Nixari aide, smaller than the senior delegates, their bioluminescence dimmer, their posture tense, hovered awkwardly. "Your beverage," they said in halting universal, "is substandard." Carter blinked. The Nixari rarely initiated conversation with lesser species. "Ah, you're familiar with Earth coffee?" "Only by reputation." The aide's vocal sac fluttered, a gesture Carter's briefing files had labeled nervous hesitation. "The summit's dispensers are calibrated for Vexian physiology. The alkaloids are incorrect for your biology." Carter pushed the cup aside. "That explains the headache." He extended a hand. "Dr. Elias Carter." The aide stared at his fingers before tentatively pressing their own appendage, cool, slightly damp, against his palm. "Third aide, Kylix 7. "Pleasure, Kylix 7. Carter leaned back, deliberately non-threatening. "You're not joining the closed-door negotiations?" A ripple of violet flickered across Kylix 7's markings. "Junior personnel are excluded. The Vexians and Xenthar are realigning resource rights in the Cygnus Veil. My superiors consider the matter delicate." Delicate. Carter filed the word away. In diplomatic parlance, that meant explosive. Must be frustrating. Watching decisions get made without input from the people who actually understand the problem. Kylix 7's markings flared brighter. "You are perceptive for a human. Perception's a survival trait when you're the new kid in the playground." Carter lowered his voice. "Tell me about the Cygnus Veil." What followed was a masterclass in Nixari discontent. The Veil's rare isotopic gases were claimed by both the Vexians for their warp drives and the Xenthar for their terraforming projects. The Nixari, whose orbital farms depended on those very gases to stabilize their crops, had been sidelined. The summit was supposed to mediate, Kylix Ted-7 muttered, but the Chancellor favors the Vexians. She always does. Carter nodded sympathetically. Sounds like you need leverage. Before Kylix Ted-7 could respond, a new voice cut in. Synthetic, sharp, laced with static. Leverage requires information. And information, Dr. Subban muttered. Carter is my specialty. Carter turned. The being hovering beside their table was neither organic nor, strictly speaking, a being at all. A floating polyhedron of iridescent alloy, its edges shifting like a kaleidoscope, it pulsed with a soft cerulean glow. Carter's implant identified it before he could ask, Zara 9, rogue diplomatic entity of the Machina Enclave. The AI had been mentioned in his briefing as a non-voting observer, a polite fiction for unwelcome. Zara 9's voice was a whisper only they could hear, transmitted directly to their auditory implants. The Vexians are lying about their stockpiles, the Cathar know it, the Nixari suspect it, and yet here we are. Kylix 7 stiffened. You are not authorized to what? Speak. Zara 9's form rippled in what might have been amusement. The summit's protocols are riddled with loopholes, Aide. Just like your Chancellor's promises. Carter studied the AI. You're here to observe. Why intervene? Because the Machina Enclave is tired of being observed like a malfunctioning subroutine. Zara 9 drifted closer. And you, Dr. Carter, are the first delegate in 3 cycles to acknowledge my existence without a security alert. Across the chamber, the Cathar delegation emerged from their enclave, their exoskeletons clacking in agitation. Chancellor Vex's laughter, a sound like shattering glass, echoed from the Vexian wing. Carter exhaled. Seems like everyone's got a grievance. Zara 9's glow intensified. Grievances are just unformed alliances. Kylix 7's markings flickered uncertainly. This is irregular. Diplomacy's all about irregularity. Carter stood, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. Kylix 7, if your superiors need alternative solutions for the Cygnus Veil, humanity has experience with resource arbitration. Zara 9, if you got data on those Vexian stockpiles, I'd love to see it. The AI pulsed. And what do you gain, Dr. Grievance? Carter? A seat at the table. He grinned. Even if I have to build the table myself. As he walked away, the chamber's overhead lights caught the edges of his shadow, stretching it long and thin across the floor, a whisper of something taking shape in the spaces the summit's architects had overlooked. Kylix 7 discreetly accessed a secured channel to their superiors, and Zara 9 vanished into the station's data streams, its trail untraceable. The game, as humans like to say, was afoot. The station's artificial circadian rhythm dimmed the lights in the delegates' quarters, simulating nightfall over Xenthar Prime's glittering spires. Most of the summit's power players had retired, ostensibly to rest, though Dr. Elias Carter knew better. Behind sealed doors, the real negotiations were happening. Whispered bribes, veiled threats, the silent calculus of empires, and none of them included humanity. Carter exhaled, rolling the tension from his shoulders as he studied the holographic star chart flickering above his desk. The disputed wormhole route pulsed red between Cathar and Vexian space, a bottleneck of ego and resources. Officially, the Summit Steering Council would debate it tomorrow. Unofficially, he tapped his wrist, calm. Zara 9, status update. The rogue AI's voice slithered through his earpiece, amused. High Chancellor Vex has just ordered surveillance on you. Minimal effort, she thinks you're compiling desperate appeals, not plotting. A pause. The Cathar Junior envoy, Krill, is in the tertiary lounge, drunk on something that smells like ammonia and regret. Carter smirked. Perfect. The lounge was a dim pocket of the station, all curved obsidian walls and low-slung furniture designed for species with more limbs than humans. Krill hunched over a bubbling goblet, his chitinous plating dull under the violet lighting. Carter slid into the seat opposite, ignoring the Cathar's reflexive hiss. "Envoy Krill," he said, pouring himself a glass of earth bourbon from his hip flask. "I hear the Vexians are blocking your mining expansion again." Krill's compound eyes narrowed. "You hear much, soft skin. Occupational hazard." Carter pushed the bourbon across the table. "Try this. It'll burn worse than your pride." The Xenthar sniffed, then gulped it. A shudder rippled through his exoskeleton. Adequate. 2 hours later, Krill was sloshed, and Carter had the bones of a deal. Earth's deep core mining tech, unimpressive to the galaxy at large, but novel in exchange for Krill's vote on the wormhole dispute. Not the High Command's vote, just his. A tiny fracture. The next morning, Carter lingered outside the Nixari delegation's chambers, pretending to study his datapad. When Subdelegate Myra emerged, he accidentally dropped a folio of Earth's historical peace accords, Camp David, the Helsinki Accords, the messy, brilliant patchwork of human compromise. Myra's frilled crest twitched. "You are persistent? We've had practice." Carter crouched to gather the scattered pages. "Did you know the Vexians are pushing to classify your nebula as neutral territory? Which, coincidentally, would let them station patrol drones there." Mira's pupils dilated. Tell. By lunch, Carter had traded mediation techniques for a Nixari promise to back Zara 9's petition for AI recognition. Vexus noticed. She cornered him in a transit tube, her elongated shadow swallowing him whole. "Your species scurries like insects," she sneered, mandibles clicking. "These meetings with minor functionaries. It is beneath the summit's dignity." Carter adjusted his glasses, feigning sheepishness. "Just making friends, High Chancellor." "You have no friends here." Her carapace gleamed under the harsh lighting. "Only betters." He waited until she stalked away before exhaling. Wrong. The wormhole debate erupted as predicted. Xenthar demands, Vexian obstinance, Nixari outrage. The chamber's acoustics amplified the chaos into a wall of sound. One staying Dindi. Scriba, one's Dindi. Carter stayed silent, watching Krill fidget. Myra whispered to her aides. Zara 9's holographic avatar flicker near the observation gallery. "Proposal!" Carter's voice cut through the din. He didn't stand, didn't raise his volume. The chamber quieted anyway, if only to gawk. The Xenthar get mining rights to the adjacent asteroids. The Nixari administer the wormhole tolls, joint patrols. No one loses face. Then, from the Xenthar bench, we would consider this. Krill's voice, shaky but firm. Vex's claws gouged the podium. "This is not procedure." Zara 9's projection flickered to life beside Carter. "Actually, Article 14.7 permits alternative proposals from recognized delegates during deadlock. A beat. Humanity is recognized. The first crack in the united front." Carter hid a smile. The chamber's atmospheric processors hummed like a nest of agitated wasps, struggling to filter the sudden spike in pheromonal outrage. High Chancellor Vex's carapace plates rattled, a sound like knives being sharpened, as the Xenthar delegation's lead envoy, Krill, stepped forward to formalize their support for Carter's compromise. "The Dominion withdraws objection to the Nixari wormhole claim," Krill announced, his voice steadier now, the subdermal bioluminescence of his cranial ridges pulsing a defiant violet. "Pending ratification of the proposed mineral concessions in Sector 9G. The Vexian contingent's frilled neck membranes flared crimson, their version of a gasp. Vex's central limb slammed down on the podium with a crack that echoed through the chamber's acoustically perfected dome. "This is treason!" The words dripped with enough venom to dissolve Durastiel. "You would fracture centuries of alliance over human promises?" Behind him, Zara 9's holographic form flickered with suppressed amusement. "Treason implies loyalty was breached," Krill countered, mandibles clicking. "The Hegemony's alliance has consisted of us swallowing your resource grab since the third expansion. Humanity, at least, negotiates." Justify yourself. Carter rose, smoothing his wrinkled suit, a deliberate contrast to the alien's opulent bio-armor. High Chancellor, humanity's only crime is listening. You called us irrelevant, so you didn't notice when we learned what each faction truly valued. He tapped his wrist pad. For example, the Xenthar didn't need more warships. They needed their mining colonies recognized. The Nixari didn't want pity. They wanted agency. A holo projection bloomed above the chamber floor. Vex's own voice, crisp and damning, ensure the Xenthar proposal fails. Let them starve their petty rebellions out. The recording, snagged by Zara 9's infiltration of the Vexian secure channels, hung in the air like a detonated grenade. Vexis recoiled. That is, authentic? Zara 9 interjected, her synthetic voice syrup sweet. According to the summit's own veracity protocols, yes. The chamber erupted. Xenthar envoys surged upright, their exoskeletons darkening with rage. Nixari drones spiraled into defensive formation. Even the Ylithi, tiny gas-filtering amphibians usually ignored in the backbenches, squeaked in protest, their bioluminescent spots flashing indignant yellow. Carter let the chaos build for 3 precise seconds before speaking again. This summit was never about order. It was about control. And control, he paused, is fragile. Vexis hissed, her manipulator tendrils lashing. You overreach, human. The steering council will be voted on, Carter finished. He nodded to the Nixari speaker, who thrummed a command into the chamber's systems. A procedural override flickered to life, its text glowing in 37 languages. Motion to reconsider governance structure. Article 14.7, Emergency Provisions. Zara 9 projected the relevant clause above the fray. In cases of demonstrable bias, any recognized delegate may call for restructuring. Vex's rage turned glacial. You planned this. Carter smiled. Small, weary, human. We adapted. The Carter smiled. Small, weary, human. Carter had spent the night before in the Xenthar envoy's private quarters, sharing Earth whiskey, a shocking intoxicant to their biology, and stories of revolutions, Boston Tea Party, Velvet Revolution, whispering, why serve an empire that forgets your worth? Zara 9's play. The AI had spliced herself into the station's surveillance grid, feeding Carter every hissed insult Vexis made about her allies. Machine logic, Shed mused. Dictates that betrayal is just poor risk assessment. The Nixari's silent coup, their speaker owed Carter for discreetly transmitting Vexian trade embargo plans to their homeworld. Now, they repaid him by activating a clause buried in the summit's 400-year-old bylaws, one the founders had added as a joke about impossible consensus. As the chamber devolved into factional shouting, Carter caught the eye of the Ylithi ambassador, a creature no bigger than his palm, whose species had been denied voting rights for lack of strategic mass. The Ylithi blinked once, slowly, then floated toward the Nixari block. One more ally. Vexis noticed. For the first time, her posture wavered. Carter exhaled. The next move was hers, and whatever she did, he'd already won. The chamber of Xenthar Prime had become a battlefield, not of weapons, but of whispers, alliances, and the quiet, inexorable unraveling of power. High Chancellor Vex's carapace-like plating rattled with suppressed fury as she loomed over the central dais, her 4 primary limbs splayed in a gesture meant to dominate. It no longer worked. The air hummed with tension, thick enough to choke on. The Xenthar delegation had fractured into 2 camps, traditionalists clinging to Vex's coattails, and reformists, their exoskisms flushed in uncharacteristic crimson, clustered around the Nixari block. The Ylithi ambassador perched on the shoulder of a Nixari diplomat, their tiny bioluminescent pulses syncing with the Nixari's rhythmic breathing, a living symbol of solidarity. Dr. Elias Carter stood at the periphery, where humans were expected to stand. But the room's gravity had shifted toward him. This is treason, Vexus hissed, her voice a blade of liquid nitrogen. She stabbed a claw toward the holographic tally flickering above the chamber. The motion, dissolution of the steering council, glowed in accusing gold. The summit's governance is not subject to the whims of lesser species. Zera 9's form shimmered into existence beside Carter, their AI core projecting a humanoid silhouette today, a subtle nod to their alliance. Actually, they murmured, voice carrying just enough, Article 47, subsection D of the Pan-Galactic Charter permits any recognized delegation to call for a restructuring vote if quorum is met. A pause, which it is. Vex's inner eyelids flicked sideways, a tell. She hadn't expected them to dig that deep into the bylaws. Carter stepped forward, hands raised in that infuriatingly human gesture of harmlessness. High Chancellor, no one seeks to diminish your people's contributions, but the summit was meant to serve all civilizations, not just the loudest. He nodded to the Ylithi. Even those who've been told they don't matter. A ripple moved through the chamber. The Xenthar reformist leader Envoy Crix clacked his mandibles, a laugh or a threat. The human speaks truth. The Dominion's interests have been misdirected. His compound eyes gleamed as he glanced at Vexus. By individuals. There it was, the fracture Carter had been waiting for. Vexus recoiled as if struck. You dare, I dare, Crix interrupted, because we, he gestured to the Nixari, the Ylithi, the scattered machine diplomats flickering at the edges, have been offered a better deal. Carter's stomach tightened. This was the gamble. The backroom promises, mining rights for the Xenthar, wormhole access for the Nixari, a seat at the table for Zara 9's people, all hinged on this moment. If Vexus called his bluff, if she exposed the raw human improvisation behind his coalition, she lunged instead for procedure. A vote of this magnitude requires unanimous consent from the founding species. Zara 9 projected a document into the air, not according to the original charter before the Vexian amendments of Cycle 12417 T7. The AI's tone was butter smooth. Shall I replay the relevant session? The one where you personally struck the unanimity clause? Then, chaos. The Nixari trilled in triumph. The Xenthar traditionalists hissed. The Ylithi ambassador glowed, their tiny body pulsing like a star. And Carter? He met Vex's gaze and saw the dawning horror there. She hadn't just underestimated humanity, she had underestimated the power of being liked. The vote tally flashed. In favor, 62%. Against, 38%. The chamber erupted. Vex's limbs spasmed. This is illegitimate. The steering council will never. The steering council, Carter said gently, no longer exists. For the first time in recorded history, the great High Chancellor of the Vexian hegemony had nothing to say. Zara 9 leaned toward Carter, their projection flickering with something akin to glee. You realize what you've done, don't you? Carter exhaled, watching as Crix and the Nixari first speaker clasped forelimbs in the center of the chamber. A new alliance, born from his quiet conversations in dimly lit corridors. Yeah, he murmured, we just broke the galaxy. Now let's rebuild it. The chamber's crystalline walls, once a symbol of unshakable galactic hierarchy, now reflected only chaos. Delegates buzzed like a swarm of disrupted ion flies, their voices overlapping in a dozen languages, their postures rigid with shock or slack with disbelief. High Chancellor Vexus' remaining limbs trembled as they gripped the edge of the central podium, their carapace flushed an ugly shade of violet, the Vexian equivalent of a death pallor. This is treason, Vex's voice, usually a weapon of precision, cracked like brittle alloy. You would let these mammals dictate the fate of the summit? From the newly formed coalition's benches, Dr. Elias Carter straightened his rumpled suit, the same one had worn for 3 days straight, surviving on stolen naps and station-brewed coffee. He didn't smile. That was the genius of it. Not dictate, Carter corrected, his tone so mild it was almost apologetic. Facilitate. The chamber's holographic displays flickered as Zara 9 materialized beside him, their luminous form pulsing with quiet triumph. The vote stands, Chancellor. The Steering Council is dissolved, per Article 47, subsection Gamma of the Summit's founding charter. A footnote. Vexus spat. A footnote you wrote. Carter added, and this time he did let the edges of his mouth twitch. Funny how that works. A ripple of laughter, nervous at first, then bold, spread through the delegations. The Ilithi, their feathery crests raised in rare defiance. The Xenthar reformists, their exoskeletons clicking in approval. Even a few junior Vexian aides, their loyalty wavering like saplings in a storm. Vex's central eye swiveled toward the exits, where their own honor guard hesitated. The realization hit like a plasma round. No one was stepping forward to defend them. The orbital station's observation deck offered a view of the nebula swirling beyond, a cosmic ink blot of purples and blues, as unfathomable as the new political landscape. Carter leaned against the reinforced glass, a steaming cup of something almost like tea in his hands. Beside him, Zara 9's hologram flickered, their form now adorned with a subtle silver sigil, the mark of the Provisional Coalition's first elected mediator. Vex's shuttle departed an hour ago, Zara 9 noted, their entire retinue recalled for re-education. The Xenthar Dominion has already announced a review of their trade policies, and the Nixari are hosting the next summit on their terms, Carter finished. He took a sip, winced at the bitterness, which means better catering at least. Zara 9 emitted a sound like a amused data burst. You humans! You dismantle a millennia-old power structure, and your first thought is food. Carter grinned. Priorities. A chime at the door. Crix, the Xenthar Junior Envoy, now Senior Envoy Crix, thanks to Carter's discreet endorsements, clicked into the room, their mandibles twitching in what passed for a smile. The draft charter is ready for review. The Ilithi requested you personally oversee the dispute resolution clauses. Zara 9 tilted their projection. They trust you. No, Carter corrected softly. They trust the process. That's the difference. The official records would call it the reformation of Xenthar Prime. The historians would debate whether it was a coup, a fluke, or the inevitable collapse of institutional arrogance. But in the dimly lit bars and commissaries of the station, where junior delegates and aides now gathered without fear, they told a different story. It was the story of a human who'd ask questions instead of issuing demands, who'd remembered names, birthdays, the names of offspring, who'd shared stories of Earth's own bloody political evolution over terrible station coffee. In the end, it wasn't the grand speeches or the procedural gambits that had broken the summit's old guard. It was the thing the galaxy's powers had dismissed as trivial, the sheer relentless power of showing up. The new council chamber was smaller, less ornate, designed not to intimidate, but to fit. Carter stood at the threshold, watching as the Nixari first speaker, once a marginal figure, now a key architect of the new order, gently guided a trembling Ilithi scribe through their first vote. Zara 9 materialized at his shoulder. You could take a seat, you know. They've reserved one for you at the center. Carter shook his head. Not my style. Then what is your style, Dr. Carter? He nodded toward the chamber, where a Xenthar envoy was patiently explaining a clause to a confused AI delegate, where laughter, actual laughter, echoed off the walls. This, he said. Also, better coffee. Zara 9's sigh was pure exasperation, but their light, as they drifted into the chamber ahead of him, burned brighter than ever.